This is Remo Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remo Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your heart, and your soul. Connect, act, recharge, and go with Remo Daily. This is Remo Daily.
Jazzy, and welcome to the house, the CEO and co-founder of Work Market, Jeff Wald. Hi, Jeff. How are you? And where are you joining us?
I am great,
today?
Felix. I'm in New York City, in Manhattan.
You are. So, first of all, before we talk about your book, let's talk about New York. There are three things, there are actually more things than New York, that are unique, remarkable to your journey. The first two that I wanted to talk to you about are about the current moment. And the third is about your personal journey, because there's so much to unpack with you, Jeff, and I'm so glad you're joining us. First, thank you for being an amazing guest. We had invited you 2 weeks ago, and police killing of George Floyd and the erupting protests against racism and police brutality turned our session that day and probably our work for the foreseeable future upside down. You still attended that day, that Monday. You shared a lot of your own thoughts on racism as a white man, as a New Yorker, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you for showing up and for sharing and for listening. So just a huge applause to you, and big thank you for coming on that day, but also for coming back today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Secondly, you graduated from Cornell and from Harvard. You went all startup after being an investment banker. What Yvonne posted in the chat before, you're part of this invisible group or movement dropping out of large organizations, venturing out by themselves. You've sold 2 companies. Now you wrote a book, your second book. You were also involved in award-winning plays and movies. It's stunning and remarkable what you have achieved. But your CV also reveals that you worked as an auxiliary police officer for the NYPD in the 19th precinct on the Upper East Side of Manhattan for, I think, about 9 years. So, Jeff, I have to ask you, as a citizen first, but also as an auxiliary police officer for many, many years, how does all this brutality unfolding on the streets, the clashes, the requests for defunding the police, what does that tell you? What do you personally make of the current moment?
Well, it's a lot, right? There's a lot of stuff in there to unpack. I will start with my service as a member of the NYPD. And it was an honor to serve and protect. I served with a lot of wonderful men and women, and I served with some men and women that I would choose never to spend time with again. I served with some men and women that made racist comments, that made bigoted comments. And there is no way, with the 800,000 men and women that serve as police officers in the United States, that we do not have tens of thousands of people that simply should not have that job. And so when I think about the issues that we have with policing in the United States, as with a lot of things, I think about data and the ability for an organization, I think it's, 1,700 different police organizations in the United States. The NYPD is the largest with 35,000 officers. But the ability for an organization to get bad employees out, and police organizations are handicapped in their ability to do that for a host of reasons, because there are clearly men and women that should not be officers serving and protecting their communities. And so, but I don't pretend that there are any easy answers, or this is not an incredibly complex issue. I will say I think the slogan of defund the police is not the best choice of words. as an officer, and again, for those that don't know, the auxiliary units, the easiest parallel is the Army Reserve. You know, you are a reserve, you have a responsibility to show up 2 nights a month and go on patrol. The auxiliary units, and for those that live in New York City, you have seen auxiliary officers hundreds of times. You don't know the difference. Bad guys know the difference, by the way. Regular citizens don't know the difference. And you have a police uniform and you have everything that a regular officer has, save for a firearm. We are not firearms authorized. And so I've certainly been in situations that I feared for my life. I've certainly been in situations that I panicked. And I will not pretend that the job of being an officer is an easy one in any way, shape, or form. I will tell you, going through the NYPD training and you're put into video simulations, appreciating that I did not have the training of the officers, but every single training simulation I shot an innocent person, every single one. And so, but back to defund the police, I will tell you that as an officer, the things that you are asked to do, whether it's dealing with emotionally disturbed people, which is the phrase the NYPD has, EDP, emotionally disturbed person, those are not things that an officer is trained to do nor should do. And so I know that the statement defund the police simply means to move services that the police end up performing away from them to other social services that are better trained and better qualified to deal with it. But the phrasing defund the police is somewhat suboptimal. And so I know that people are kind of, I'm pretty sure everybody that says defund the police knows what it means, a reallocation. But that being said, there are examples of police departments being completely dissolved and then reformed because it is an easy way to get bad officers out. And so when you think about the impediments to structural police reform, the thing that comes to my mind the most are police unions and the ability of the unions to constrict the amount of data and to protect bad officers that just shouldn't have that job. But I, again, would not pretend to understand this issue fully. I have some experiences with it. I have my own personal, experience to draw on, but it is minor compared to what happens every day. I'll leave you with this one story of my time in the NYPD. We were going up to the 5th floor, which is where the auxiliary units have our lockers and everything. It was the end of a shift. Shift is generally about 6 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. And somebody reached into their pocket and some change fell on the floor of the elevator. And for those that have been in police precincts, the elevators are metal. And so it clanged. It was a clang, 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 clang. And everybody turned and looked just instinctively. And then someone in the elevator said, "Whew, it's a good thing there aren't any Jews in here." And I am Jewish. And I will tell you that is actually, I think, the first and only time in my entire life that I experienced that, right? Which is a ridiculous blessing and whatever, that I haven't faced those things. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my God, do I fight him? I mean, we are both armed. We have batons and other weapons. We don't have a firearm. I'm in a crowded elevator with a whole lot of other members of the NYPD. And so, all this is going through my mind in the split second that I had. And I turned to everybody and I said, "Well, I'm Jewish." And the elevator got really quiet. And then I said, "So get out of my way because I'm going to go get that change." And they all laughed. And then the officer that said that said, "It's a good thing there aren't any Jews in here," came up to me after and when I was at my locker changing. And he said, "Oh, do you know what I am?" And I'm thinking, asshole? Bigoted? Like, I don't know what you are. And he said, "I'm a gypsy, so you better watch or I'll steal all your stuff." And I was like, okay. I mean, I appreciate that's your attempt at de-escalating and whatever. And I didn't take the opportunity to, have a teaching moment with him. I was just like, yeah, all right, man, whatever. And I don't know that I ever saw him again that I remember. But it is a complex issue that I certainly do not have a ton of answers to, but certainly have, as we all do, some opinions.
And thank you for sharing your experience here and some of your personal opinions. I really appreciate it. Such a complex, loaded topic. And I just would like to provide you with one follow-up from Anne here in the chat. Why does it happen that it's easy to shoot innocent people in the video simulations while training learning? Of course, you're not the person that set up the training and learning for the NYPD, but maybe you have an opinion on that, why the training that you received was as such that it was.
The point of me bringing up the training story, because anybody that goes through that training, they bring civilians in a lot. I remember they brought the city council in, and every person of the city council shot somebody, is just to show the complex situation that officers face. And the reality is that 99.9% of the time, they get it right. They do the right thing. The unfortunate thing is the 0.1% of the time they don't, somebody dies, potentially. And so it is just to highlight the difficulty of that job. I will relate one other personal story. The first instance that I had where a call came in of a 10:30, an assault in progress, my partner and I happened to be like a block from what was happening. Now, as an auxiliary unit, we are not supposed to respond to a violent crime in progress. That is not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to direct traffic or do whatever an officer needs, crowd control, things like that. And we're supposed to be another set of eyes and ears. We're supposed to take your little shoulder mic and say, Central, this is 19 Auxiliary Foot. We have a 1032 on this location. I'm going away from this location because I am not supposed to interdict. But, you know, we were kids. And so instead of walking away, which is what protocol would tell us, we walked towards the situation. We walked around a corner and there were 3 men beating a figure that was prone on the ground. 2 were kicking and 1 was hitting with a baseball bat. And my partner took out his baton and ran in, said, "Stop NYPD." And I completely froze. I was petrified. I didn't know what to do. And so I'm not embarrassed to say, but you know, you'd like to think, oh, you charge in and you do this, you do that. You won't when you're actually faced in like a combat situation. You freeze. And I did. And the only thing that got me moving was my partner, right? We are responsible for each other. And so he made, I mean, you know, that whole freezing only took 2 or 3 seconds, but he made it a few steps where I was like, I have to support him. But I didn't know if those people had a gun. I was 100% sure I didn't. They had a baseball bat. We had a baton. And so nothing about that situation said charge in, but he charged in and I froze, which is to say, I'd like to say, oh, I would do the right thing and I would do this. You can't imagine the stresses that go on into that job. But I'll leave it at that. That was the only reason I brought up the training, is that it is a stressful situation and it is very easy to stand on the sidelines and say, oh my gosh, they clearly should have done this, clearly should have done that. That is in no way, shape, or form to highlight or to minimize the example of the murder of George Floyd or the murder of many, many people of color and other citizens. That is just to say, in the normal course of police work, mistakes are going to get made that no human could do differently.
Yes, and thank you for letting us put you on the spot here for something that has been part of your life, but of course is not the core of what you do every day. And thank you for sharing this with us. Number 3, I wanted to talk to you about is your journey, where I listened to a podcast about your rise from banker to founder and your successes. You also shared something, though, from your journey that founders usually do not share, which applies to what you just did. You can't sit with discomfort. You shared the in-between, the failing, the deepest point you had. Your first startup was on a great track. You had over a dozen customers signed up and millions raised. And then your 2 co-founders sued each other. And the company went south and you had to pay the investors back partly with your own money. You were completely broke. You describe in a podcast how you were feeling something close to depression. You didn't leave your apartment for a month until you restarted the company years later, and it became an amazing exit with Salesforce buying up the company that bought yours and that made you wealthy. But that in between that you shared is nothing a lot of people can or want to talk about. And that's exactly, I think, what is happening right now to a lot of us. So please share with us, what did you take from that in between, from that moment when the world came crushing down on you? What did you do, and who or what made you actually get back up?
So, I have gone on my own personal journey, as we all have, and part of that journey is vulnerability. And I never shared that story with almost anybody. There were very few people that knew that the first attempt at Spinback, that was the name of the company, and that eventually got sold. First attempt went bankrupt and bankrupted me. I mean, not technically bankrupted me, that's a legal proceeding, but I was broke. Got the call from my mom, do you need to move back home? Which is amazing to have that support network, but is still horrifying for somebody that felt like they were going to accomplish so much. And so when people would ask me, even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, oh, what was your entrepreneurial journey? I would say, oh, I founded this company called Spinback, and through various twists and turns, it eventually got sold, and it was a big outcome. I wouldn't say, I started this company Spinback, it failed miserably, bankrupted me, I went into a big depression, and it took years to kind of rebuild my capital base and to rebuild, my confidence, and then eventually with some new partners, we restarted it, and it was a good outcome. I just glossed it over. And so when people started saying, oh, thank you so much for sharing, that's vulnerability, and I would think, no, it isn't really. When I was vulnerable with that data, I didn't share it. When I was still down in the dumps and still questioning myself, which I still do every day, question myself. But the fact that I was only willing to share it after I've had not only one successful exit, but then a second one, like a 9-figure exit. The fact that I only am comfortable sharing the failures after I've had these tremendous successes doesn't strike me as vulnerability. But the fact that I'm about to leave the company that bought Work Market, and I'm going to go back on my own, and I'm still a little bit afraid of starting my 5th company, and I still have some imposter syndrome, and I'm still afraid to go do it. That's vulnerability, because that's something I'm feeling now, and I am scared. I'm scared to go do it again. What if I build this next one and it fails, and people look back and go, oh, well, those other 2 must have been a fluke. You just got lucky. And by the way, I did get lucky. And so I do struggle with it. Now, back to your question, though, Felix, in terms of what I learned, I will tell you, it is very difficult to learn or hear anything while you go through it. And the number of people that would call up, the people that knew, which were not many, but my brothers are high on that list, and my parents, and they would say, oh, you're going to look back on this and think it was the best experience. And I would just go, fuck you. I don't want to hear that. You know what? I want to be a great experience. All my money back. That'd be fucking great. And I was so angry at my co-founders and myself. And I will tell you, I still replay those last few weeks. And so, and I blame myself for what could have gone differently, because look, we ended up selling that company and we all did well from it. But there was a 2.5-year hiatus where the company wasn't operational. And I think about what we could have built. I mean, Spinback was, for all intents and purposes, Pinterest. And we could have built that and been billionaires, but we didn't. And I blame myself for not being willing to go out on my own. I could have pushed both of them out. They both would have walked away. I could have left them with a little bit of equity. They both would have done it. I could have pushed one of them out and partnered with the other, but I was afraid to do that too. I was definitely afraid to go on my own. That was never going to happen. The idea of just having one partner was scary to me for a host of reasons. And so all I did for 6 to 9 months was try to bridge their gaps, was to try to get them to get along, and they would both just talk to each other through me, tried to come up with governance provisions that made everybody comfortable, that even though they weren't getting along, we could still build this company. And I couldn't get them to bridge their gaps. And by the time I realized, you know what, this isn't going to work, one of them's got to go, that there is no other option, it was too late. They had both dug their heels in and hired lawyers, and lawsuits were filing, were flying back and forth. And that was what I was deep in depression about, was that I could have done it. Like, if it wasn't for my own failure, my own weakness, my own insecurities, I would have acted quicker and I would have saved the company and we wouldn't be in this position. In terms of what got me out, I'll spare you the nitty-gritty details of it. But a friend of mine called up and he just was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'd always known that, and it is one of my favorite sayings now, that in startup world, failure is not only an option, it is the most likely outcome. Statistically, it's the most likely outcome. You have a 90% chance of failing. That's just data. And so when I build startups, when I advise startups, when I invest in startups, I'll always talk about, what are you doing to increase the probability of success? Because you're starting out with a very, very small probability of success. And so is that action increasing the probability of an outcome? And the outcomes in startup world are usually divided into capital windows, right? I raise enough money for 18 months. And when I get to 18 months, or usually, 14 months, I start raising again. If I haven't created enough value to raise money at a higher valuation or just the same valuation, then at 18 months, it's over. And so I always operate in those capital windows. What are you doing to increase the value of the company in the capital window I have? And so I think a lot about my other favorite saying, which is, the key to success in startup world is getting knocked down 7 times and getting up 8. And that's actually a very common saying in startup land. Like, there are bracelets and there are t-shirts. And it always strikes me as wonderful for 3 reasons. The first is the number of times, right? Because being a founder, as many of the people in your community know, means getting knocked down again and again and again. And you just know you're going to get knocked down. You got to pick yourself up. Second is just, it's somewhat evocative. Like, it just creates this visual imagery of picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and just moving forward. And I always love that, because there's very rarely a hand reaching out to pull you up. That is you pushing against the dirt, pushing yourself up, dusting yourself off, and moving forward. And the third reason I love it is that it's just mathematically inaccurate. It doesn't really make any sense. I mean, if I got knocked down 7 times, I would get up 7 times. I'm not sure why it's 7 to 8, but that is it. That's the saying.
You start on the ground?
I guess you start on the ground. In theory, I mean, we don't start on the ground. We start on our 2 feet marching forward. And so somebody called me up and just said, "Look, you got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off. I mean, what are you doing?" And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I disconnected the internet that day when he called me, because I realized all I was doing was just watching stuff online. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to rebuild, I need to focus. And I viewed the internet as a distraction. And I did not have the internet in my home until about 3.5 months ago. Friends would come over to stay with me and they'd be like, "Oh my God, this is so great," and blah, blah. They're like, "What's the Wi-Fi?" I'm like, "I don't have any Wi-Fi." They're like, What? I'm like, "You don't have to stay here. You can go someplace else. I don't have Wi-Fi. Make your phone a hotspot. It'll work for a solid hour." And so those were some of the things that I learned and some of the things that got me out of the house.
Thank you, Jeff. And you still run Work Market, an enterprise software platform that enables companies to efficiently and compliantly organize, manage, pay freelancers. Was acquired by ADP, the world's largest human resources company, 2 years ago, which you're now a part of. But you also spent the last 6 out of 10 years running this company, conducting interviews and doing research for The End of Jobs, which was just published. I'm going to post it in the chat here so everybody can have a look. My favorite blurb, by the way, in your book is, "This is the best book ever written on any subject. Phyllis Wald, Jeff's mom." That's a great blurb. That's a hard one to get. But it also made me wonder, who did you really write the book for?
Well, it was certainly not my mother, who thinks pretty much everything I do is pretty stupid. She hated my first book. When I presented her the idea of writing a book, the first book is called The Birthday Rules. It's a fun and flexible guide for raising children in a technology-enabled world. And she's like, that's stupid. I was like, okay. And
Thanks,
then when
Mom.
she saw the quote in this, she called me up immediately. She's like, oh, hey, I saw the quote in the book. I didn't say that. I'm like, yeah, I know, Mom. I am aware. And the publisher would not allow that quote to go on the back cover of the book, which is what I wanted. I wrote the book because as an entrepreneur and as someone that is very data driven, which you may have heard in some of the things that we've talked about thus far, I found it very frustrating that people were making predictions about the future of work, so-called futurists and experts, and their predictions were not based on data, they weren't based on historic trends, they weren't based on evidence. And I don't understand that. I will never understand it. I will never understand why anybody gives any level of trust or veracity to a prediction that has no basis in fact. I won't get it. And one of the big things that always troubled me was when I founded Work Market in 2010, there was a general statement made by everybody in the HR world. Every single person believed this, which was by 2020, 50% of the labor force would be on demand. On demand meaning either freelance or a temp. And it was so stupid. It was such a dumb prediction. It had no basis in fact. There was no world in which it was going to become remotely true. Now that said, I put it in my investor decks because we raised, $70 million to build Work Market. So I had to have a big trend that made sense to. But I thought it was just inane. And as somebody that was building the largest piece of software to manage your on-demand labor forces, nobody had a bigger incentive for that to be true than me. And I can tell you definitively, it was never going to be true. It did not come true in any way, shape, or form. The on-demand labor market is about the same size as it was in 2010. And it'll be about the same size in 2030, but a little bit bigger. It was a little bit bigger than it was in 2010. It'll be a little bit bigger in 2030, but roughly the same size when you think about statistics, right? The increase will be relatively statistically insignificant. And so I wanted to bring some clarity to the discussion around the future of work because we stand on the precipice of a massive change in the way we work with robots and AI. And it is very important to understand how that change will unfold. And it's very important to understand how we have gone through technological step functions in the past when technology's increased the same way it is now. We've done that 3 other times, usually known as the 3 industrial revolutions: mechanization, electrification, and computerization. And a lot of people are calling the robots and AI the 4th industrial revolution. In the book, I call it the first services revolution, which I explain in the book. And it's important to understand how companies and workers renegotiate their contract because companies end up gaining so much power over workers with this increase in technology. And how do we create fairness and balance in society, because that kind of imbalance is not sustainable. So what are the mechanisms that workers use?
Interject here quickly, also to be
Yep.
mindful of the time. We asked in the beginning, what does our community think about work in 2040? You talk about the end of jobs, not as in robots are coming, but kind of like as in the end of in the office, one manager, 9-to-5 jobs, and towards on-demand workers. So very close what we actually saw from our community here in the beginning, what you are all out there are predicting. You describe companies becoming agile corporations. So please take us, to wrap this up, our amazing conversation here, take us into the day of an on-demand worker in an agile corporation in 2040. How does that look like?
Well, one of the main predictions, I broke the book up into the near-term predictions and the long-term predictions. One of the main near-term predictions is something we call convergence. And it is the idea that all of the tensions, all the dynamics that, just to use an archetype, the Uber driver faces, all of those things are permeating the full-time labor force. So while I do not believe that in 2040, the on-demand labor force will be massively bigger than it is now, and we can go into why that is, what is becoming increasingly clear is that all the things that the Uber driver faces, every worker will face. Meaning, increased personal responsibility. In the case of the Uber driver, total personal responsibility around healthcare, retirement, training, marketing of their skills, development. It means more remote work. It means data-driven HR. The idea that you are not given one annual review with qualitative feedback, you are given weekly quantitative reviews of very specific metrics. Again, that Uber driver finds out in very real time, did they show up on time? Did they get the thing, were they professional? They get a rating and all those things. Algorithms allocating work. The Uber driver obviously understands that an algorithm is sending the work to him or her, and that algorithm is predicated not only on location, but on how they are doing. And always being on. The idea that there is no more 9 to 5. A freelancer or an Uber driver doesn't sit there and go, all right, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done. They work until they basically have made enough for themselves or until they can't work anymore. But we can get into some of that stuff later. So this idea of convergence is very powerful, and the dynamics of that Uber driver and all of those things permeating all types of employment, full-time, part-time, temp, and freelance.
Thank you, Jeff. One last question I have to ask you. Talking about vulnerability, talking our own imposter syndrome, talking about what remote dailies become, and as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a future of work expert, I have to ask you for some personal advice at the very end. In what way could something like remote daily be part of the future of work? Where would you see this, what we're doing now, in 2040?
So I think the idea of social connection, of interaction, is incredibly vital. It is another trend. I don't talk that much about it in the book, but the idea of wellness, of creativity, of having an open exchange of ideas is certainly a bedrock of the types of jobs that are predicted to expand. And so whether it's wellness or connection, people crave it, right? They want to have these dialogues and discussions. They are always shown to be very good in terms of productivity, whether it's taking that step back. And at Work Market, we do meditation every day at noon. I lead a meditation, and that has continued through the pandemic. Now it's just on the phone. And everybody needs to take that step back and recharge their batteries to be productive and to be creative and to show empathy and to be able to interact with colleagues in a way that has constructive conflict. Because once you start with trust, then you can get constructive conflict, and then you start getting to better results. And so every study on human psychology in the workplace would tell us these things. And so I think it will become a standard of practice. Whether remote daily is the standard of practice, well, that's on you guys to make sure that you are having these conversations. But this format packaged up for companies to do internally with their teams, I think becomes very important. And certainly in the construct of people in a freelance environment or an entrepreneurial environment, being able to have these dialogues with people going through similar experiences is vital. I will leave you with Felix, your partner and friend Amal Sarva, who I've invested in, a bunch of things Amal has done over the years. Amal and I met through an organization called the Founders Roundtable, and it was started about 17 years ago, 15 years ago, somewhere around there. And it was just a group of entrepreneurs. There were initially just 10 of us. And we got together once a month just to say, oh, wow, I can't believe the stuff I'm dealing with, because nobody else really can empathize. They can't put themselves in our shoes. They don't know what it's like to have to slog it out every day. Not that these are the big challenges of mankind, but they were challenges to us. And our families wouldn't understand, our former colleagues wouldn't understand, our teammates didn't really understand what it is to be a founder and to have all of that stuff on your shoulders. And so that organization was a very helpful, but very, very periodic gathering that allowed us to be creative and to be vulnerable with each other.
Jeff Wald, co-founder and CEO of Work Market, thank you so much. Huge round of applause. Thank you for sharing your journey into the future of work, sharing with us a journey into the mind of a New Yorker that also served as part of the NYPD. And most importantly, I want to thank you for sharing your own vulnerability here. And I'm really grateful you had time for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thanks
so much for
also.
having me.
Thank you. And thanks also to our listeners and viewers out there on LinkedIn and YouTube.